Good afternoon, everybody. Glad to be with you on this afternoon. I'm sure there's no place you'd rather be but an annual meeting of your cathedral. But I'm really these are always I can always tell who the faithful and committed are by who decides to put themselves through an annual meeting. So thanks for coming and being here and listening to a few things I might have to say today. And Derek asked me to limit my presentation to 2 hours, so I'll do my best. That was a joke. We're gonna gonna talk for 10 minutes or so, and then we'll have some questions. And I hope it's an honor to be here. So I hope that you gain something from this. So thank you, Dean Derek, and wardens and warden-elect for the opportunity to address you today. This slide that I have in front of you and that we use on our website, you may recognize that space as the Cathedral of St. Paul in Buffalo. I love this. That day, it was our first joint ordination of our two dioceses. As I've been saying to many, normal is our history, it's not our future. I'm not sure what we mean when we talk even now about new normal. If the church has been changing over the last decade or two in radical ways and in ways that we all know and we all have seen and we've all borne witness to in a variety of ways, not the least of which is fewer people, different loss of revenue, all of those things that we find, we still are managing to reach out to our communities in new ways, but we're also facing a pretty radical change and shift. I've heard, and it was music to my ears to hear numbers of people say adaptation today, or we have to adapt. We talk about what that means. We talk about adapting. I say, well, what does it mean to adapt? Well, so we just change for the situation that we're facing. Well, that's true. But I like to try to unpack a bit more about what it means to adapt to these times. And I do so standing on firm ground of our history and tradition. And as part of Dean Derek's address this morning, he spoke using the wonderful scripture, I can do all things, we can do all things through Christ who strengthens us, anything, including adapt to these times. Here's what I'd say it's kind of like these times. This is how I sort of feel like it. I feel like I was never much of an athlete, so this doesn't really even apply to me. I'm going to use this all very loosely. But I feel like I was playing a particular game. Like I was playing basketball and I knew how to do that. And I knew all the rules to it and I had it kind of mastered. I at least knew what it took to win, when the crowd would applaud and when they wouldn't. I mean, I understood what I was doing. Just for me personally, I'm a product of the 1980s, early 90s youth groups. Remember those when they were huge and they met every Sunday night? I mean, that's one of the reasons I'm sitting here. All right. Those have been gone for a long time. So, I mean, I'm just saying, I remember in the church, particularly what it was like. I know how to play that game. I was trained and formed and taught to play that particular game. Now I'm going to add another level to it, not just take the average parish in the Episcopal Church. Now I'm going to add cathedral to that layer, which is a whole added layer. You have a ministry to the diocese, usually to the city in which you live. You're a parish, but you're not a parish. You're a cathedral, but you're not just a cathedral. You reach out to your neighborhood, but you also reach out to the whole diocese, and you also are the mother church for a huge region. All of these things, we all knew in some ways, though, what that meant and how to do it. Now, what I think has happened is we've walked onto a different field or into a different playing arena, and We don't know what game we're playing. We don't even know we don't know what it takes to win. We have no idea what it would take to even entertain the people who came. We really, all we know is how we used to do it. And all of the sudden, the way we used to do it doesn't work anymore. Now, it started to not work a long time ago, but now it really doesn't. And now I feel like I'm standing on the field going, what game are we playing here? Now, the mission is pretty clear. I think Jesus gave us a pretty reasonable imperative, and that hasn't changed at all. But the way in which that translates to the world around us, it has changed, and it's changed dramatically. Enter adaptation. What does it mean to adapt? I just want to give you a bit of a framework on a way of thinking about this on the grounding that we can do all things, that we are capable through Christ of doing all things. But how do we operationalize that? How do we do that? How do we know if we are? Let's talk about what it means to adapt. I want to present a framework. Oh, there we go. I want to talk about, and don't worry, there's no test after this. This looks more complicated maybe than it actually is, but I think it's important to raise these issues. There's two basic kinds of problems that we face as a church. Some are technical problems, and those would be like in the type 1 problems. And some are adaptive, and those are type 3 problems. And then, of course, because we're Anglicans, I had to add the type 2, the mixed type, because we do a little both and. Sometimes it's a little of both. But let me say it to you this way. A technical problem is a problem you know how to solve. A technical problem in real life is like the light bulb is out or the light won't come on. Let's just say the light doesn't come on when you flip the switch. So you change the light bulb. And if that doesn't work, you might mess with the wiring or the switch. But the point is, at some point, you can hire the authority. You can even hire an electrician if you have to come figure out what in the world is wrong with the light. In the church, we have technical problems too. Things that we fix, our property are often technical issues. Back in the day, we also knew how to program things to get people to come to church. We just knew how to do it. You had an invite a friend Sunday, or you had a program, or you had a dinner. And remember back in the day too, when we used the phone tree. Remember phone trees? When like you called one person and then they called two other people. And I mean, all of this, we knew how to do these things and they worked. Except now when we try those same things, they don't. Remember how we say, well, boy, we used to have this event or that event and we'd get 1,000 people would come to this thing, or it'd be standing room only. And now we have it and we can barely get people to come out. Right, but we think, oh, well, if we just try harder or if we double down on that, something's going to change. Sometimes technical problems and things that used to be technical problems aren't anymore. They're adaptive. And now I would say that what we're facing as a cathedral, as a church, particularly as a cathedral right now, are adaptive problems. Those are problems that are not clear. The problem isn't particularly clear. Like if I said to you about the church being in decline, we could probably sit here all day and all have different reasons about why that is. What's the problem? All the problem is people don't make the kids come to church like they used to. When I was growing up, my parents, Sunday was church day and you had to go or you couldn't do anything else the rest of that. I mean, that's how I came up, right? So that's the tape that's the tape that's running in my head. When I was a kid, my parents said, if you don't go to church, you can't do anything. Well, nobody does that anymore. The world's different. Okay. It's not that world anymore. So we might think that's the problem, or we might say, oh, well, we haven't kept up with the times, or it's not relevant, or the church is too political, whatever our reasons. But the point is, we don't really know. We don't really know what we're up against because we're playing a new game. That means that in order to figure out what the problem even is, we have to learn. It requires learning. So it requires learning to figure out what the problem is. The solution requires us to learn. And the focus of the work, and this is the point I want to emphasize. The point of the work, the focus of the work is the stakeholders. That's you. It's not the dean. It's not the wardens only. Although they're important, and you have a fine dean at the helm, I must say. I really mean that. He's doing a fine job. I'm going to say more about that later and to embarrass him some more. But it's all of us have to get in the room and figure this out. And the thing that has to happen in order to do that is you have to marshal the resources to do it. And that's what your dean and your vestry and your wardens are doing now. And that's why they're making hard decisions. That's why personnel cuts have to be made, cost cuts have to be made. And that's so that when you're ready to begin to make these adaptive interventions that I'm going to talk about, when you're ready to try something that requires some learning, you have the resources available to do it. And that's not going to happen magically. The only way that happens is through some pretty difficult decisions and the work of all the stakeholders in the system. So technical problems and adaptive problems, technical ones that we know how to fix. It's easy. We have the expertise. And adaptive problems, we just don't know. What would make more people come to church? What would bring more people into relationship with God in this time? We really do not know the answer to that. That's the honest truth. 30 years ago, we could have given you an answer to that question. We cannot give you an answer to that question now. And that's evidenced by the state of the church. Now, cathedrals that are turning the corner, and I think the cathedrals are going to turn the corner before many of the parishes and much of the rest of the church. Cathedrals that are turning the corner are cutting back to essentials in order to have the resources to make adaptive interventions and do some experimenting. And that's what you're doing now. You are building the foundation. You're trying to figure out now, what field am I on and what game are we playing? We're not sure yet, but we're going to do all we can to prepare for that. And that's what you are doing in this time. Here's what I call our adaptive archetypes. You sort of know when you're dealing with adaptive issues when these things show up. So this is just kind of a way to know, oh, wow, we have problems we're not sure how to deal with. One, as I say, when you see a gap between espoused values and behavior, in other words, when we say, this is what we stand for justice and peace and bring reconciliation and bring people into relationship with God and serving the poor, and we only give ourselves a C for that, or we don't really have our budget aligned with that, or we're not really making the impact we want to make. So when we see that, and when we keep trying to tweak things and it still doesn't work, and we still have that gap, we know we've got something adaptive going on. A second thing is competing commitments. This is a tough one. The church is great about this. So we say, well, we want to have more programming and we want to reach out more, but we also want to save more money. We want to expand the reach of the cathedral and the staff, but we don't want to hire as many people. I mean, so you've got two things. And here's what the church typically does with this. It tries to run a middle road, which means it solves neither problem well. The fact of the matter is, at some point you have to make a decision. And this is what the church doesn't do. I mean, we use discernment as a word to avoid actually making decisions, particularly when it comes to competing commitment. Well, we're just going to discern. Well, if we just think about it, let's see if we can find a middle way. Sometimes with a competing commitment, there really isn't. You have to pick a path. It doesn't mean you can't change it. And I'll say something about that, but you got to pick a path. And I think I think your dean right now is doing an outstanding job navigating competing commitments, which means that a third of you are probably torqued off about the decisions to get. That's what happens when decisions get made about, and that's in the world of adaptations, a third of us are going to be mad about something all the time, just saying, and that includes me. I mean, it's just the way it is. There's no way to navigate this space without making decisions that sometimes we don't like. The way it goes. Discussing the undiscussable. This is program in churches. This is usually a program or a personnel decision or something that we never want to talk about. Like, we know we need to deal with it, but no one wants to bring it up. We know we have to address this particular issue, but everybody's saying, I'm not bringing that up. If you want to take that on, you go ahead. you know you got an adaptive problem. Or when you're thinking one thing, but saying something else. You're like, I really want to tell them they need to do this, but I'm not saying that because if I do that, people will go crazy. In order to deal with something adaptive, and in order to know you have it, is discussing the undiscussable. And then my favorite, avoidance of work. And what this means is not being lazy. This usually means we're going to create a committee and we're going to spend the next 5 years talking about it. And then when the committee comes back and makes their recommendations, we don't do any of it. That's what I mean. The committee itself isn't bad if you say to them, whatever you come back with, we're going to probably do in some form. Then you're not avoiding work. And finally, and this is critical, and this is where I think your dean is also showing outstanding leadership, is understanding adaptive interventions. Like, that's things you're going to try as an iterative process. Now, the word iterative is banned in my office. I'm not allowed to say it because I say it so much. So now I have an audience where I can say it. But what I mean by iterative is that it constantly is changing. So here's the thing. If we try something and it doesn't work, we're going to stop doing it. Or if we try and it doesn't work, we'll adapt and iterate and do it again. And people say, well, what happens, with this partnership between the two guys? What if it doesn't work? Then we won't do it anymore. I mean, it's really not that difficult. I mean, when things don't, or we'll change it, or we'll try something new. And I see what you're doing now is preparing for the opportunity to start experimenting. You're making the space necessary to play this new game that you don't know what it is yet. And cathedrals that are doing that are marshaling the resources and creating the space necessary and making the difficult decisions. And brothers, sisters, siblings, I'm asking you to hang in there with it. It is going to be a rocky ride. When you start to iterate on these processes, when you start to experiment, things won't work. Things will work. Things will never go as you think they're going to go. I guarantee you that. That's the one thing I can tell you for sure. The other thing I can tell you for sure is that you can do all things. And that what Jesus has promised is real. And that kingdom is within inside all of us. And this is our time, friends. What we're going to do in this season of life, we are probably not going to see the fruits of, but our children and our children's children will. This is the time that we're in now. God brought us here to this time in this space. We're not in another time, another place, although there are days when I would wish otherwise. Here we are. So I'm asking you to stick with it. And I'm saying that in my experience, and I've been all over the church, you have an outstanding dean, have outstanding leadership, wardens, and vestry. They're doing the best they can, and you won't always like what they're doing. That's just the way it is. And adaptive work is hard. But thank you for what you are doing in this time and place. And thank you for who you are and for the witness that you're giving, and know of my full support for all of you in this time. And so I'd be glad to take a few questions. I think we have a few minutes to do that. And I'll also be willing to, I'm available via email or otherwise, but thank you.
Can I ask a question, Bishop? This is Reed Hefner.
Yes.
Would you just talk for a minute about the partnership which you mentioned? How do you see the partnership working for the average congregation and for the average parishioner?
Yep. Thank you. Well, first of all, we've been able to, for about $400,000 less in operating monies, we have been able to provide more support to congregations, more staff and diocesan support, more diocesan-wide programming, and we'll be able to provide direct support to the congregations in terms of grant funding. So that's how I see it primarily. Also, it will allow us, without having to increase assessments, without having to place more burden on the congregations, we'll actually be able to do more. So what it's doing is it's lightening up the top of the organization and pushing it down uh, pushing the savings down. So, for instance, our staff has been able to increase its capacity by about 30% for less money than we were spending before the partnership. So it's not just a trickle down effect, it's creating more capacity in the whole system. That's how I see it, both at the diocesan level, but at the parish level, it's reducing any possible future burden on you and pushing some of the money down to you. And I think that that's already beginning to happen. Granted, not at the speed I would like it to happen, given this last year. I mean, this for all of us, it's a loss in terms of organizational development.